Hey guys, it's Ian here with Hobbies of Man once again, and today we're doing another book review. Today we're looking at Bookshops Bonedust by Travis Baldree. This is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, and it's published by Tor Publishing. I think he made a deal with Tor in England, and then from there it spread across the world, and they came back and published it here in the States. Although I might be wrong about that, but I think that's what it says in the acknowledgement and the author's note at the end of the book. The demographic for this is adult. Teenagers can read this and they might find some enjoyment in it, but I'm pretty sure this is aimed at adults. And actually, I think it's actually aimed at adult women, just based on the fact that most of the characters are women. It has a very, cutesy, simple sapphic romance and stuff like that. But a lot of, guys end up reading this and, like myself, end up enjoying it. So it's not that, the demographic is not that specific. It's just adult fantasy. In terms of genre, I will call this a slice of life fantasy because I don't like the term cozy fantasy. One, because this genre already existed, and whoever came up with the idea of a cozy fantasy was just co-opting this genre and putting a cutesier book talk name to it, and I don't like that. And two, because cozy fantasy to me implies that nothing can really happen, even though there are definitely stakes and realities to this. And in fact, some of the stakes in here might even be more serious than anything in normal epic fantasy because they're more realistic, right? And so it's not necessarily cozy if you're dealing with like existential dread that, most real people might also feel as well, right? But it is more a slice of life. It is not about saving the world. It's maybe not even about saving anything. It's just about going through life in a fantasy setting, right? So I think slice of life is a better title for this genre than cozy fantasy, right? It does not have an adaptation. I would love to see this animated as a show. I think that you combine all of the novels and all of the novellas and anything that he's worked on, you make it chronological, and then you set it up as like a 2-season show that has maybe, 5 to 6 episodes per season, and it would be awesome. It would be great, and it'd be really, really enjoyable to watch. But I don't know if that's really in the cards for this series, right? So let's move on from that. In terms of rating, this is a 5 out of 5 for me. I really enjoyed book 1, and I enjoyed this one just as much. It was a bit different for me because book 1 is very meaningful to me in the sense that it helped me deal with some stuff, some struggles that I was going through at the time, right? My grandfather had just passed away. My dad was very, very distraught about it, and I didn't really have a good way to help him through it. And he was out of town trying to make sure to go visit his dad before he passed away, right? And he managed to do that, but I couldn't go with him because my sister was graduating, and it wasn't fair that all of us would go to visit my grandpa instead of celebrating my sister. So I decided to stay back with her, and my dad would travel down to Mexico on his own, right? And so those days were kind of hard, mostly in the sense that I was dealing with like the fact that I was ineffectual as someone helping someone else deal with grief, right? I don't believe in religion. I don't believe in God or anything like that. And so saying, grandpa's in a better place is straight up a lie from my perspective, right? And since my dad is also not religious, it's impossible to say something like that with any meaning, right? I mean, we understand what we mean, and the point is that it's a way to, say that we share the grievance, but, it was just difficult. And so I was reading Legends and Lattes that day, the day after, because I couldn't find anything meaningful to do, and I needed something to help me get through it. And I picked up the book because that reading is how I get through difficult times. And so Legends and Lattes to me is a very special book, right? It helped me deal with some, emotional difficulties I had. This book didn't really do that, but it was still really enjoyable. It was very cozy. And I also actually kind of read it while dealing with the loss of someone, right? My dog had recently died. And this was the first time we had gone home since my dog died. And it was very sad and lonely. The house felt really empty and quiet, right? And this story has a dog character in it called Pot Roast. He's actually not a dog. He's like a owl corgi, I guess is the best way that I can describe it. He's a Griffith. And so seeing these characters interact with this funny little dog was also helpful to deal with these kind of difficulties that I was facing, right? So even though the difficulty or the emotional support that I got from this book was a bit different, because at this point it'd been over a month and a half. The hurt wasn't as prominent. It was still, it's still connected with that. And so it was kind of interesting that this year I read both of Travis Baldree's books, and both times it was to help me deal with loss, right? So I don't know. I think these are great books. I really appreciate them. They're not going to be my favorite or anything. They're not like that amazing, but they are meaningful for the fact that I read them at a specific time in my life, right? So the premise of this book is that this is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, and we see a much younger Viv who's hurt. She has a big injury in one of her legs, and she has to spend a season in this sleepy little town of Merk. And while she's there, she ends up befriending a bookshop owner and helping the people of this village kind of go through life. And it's really, really enjoyable and relaxing. So in terms of plotline here, we open up with a prologue where we see how Viv gets injured. She's a bit overconfident. She's very zealous because she's a very powerful, big, strong orc, right? She's counting undead as she cuts them down, and eventually she gets too far ahead of her team, and this is when problems start for her. She gets overwhelmed by the wits, or the zombies or undead or whatever you want to call them, and one of them manages to run a pike through her leg. This causes her severe injury. It hits like a major artery or something, and so she passes out. Rackham, the leader of the team that she's with, Rackham's Ravens, manages to save her, and he tells her that he knew this was the sort of thing that was probably going to happen because she was a brand new adventurer, and that he has set her up at Merk to get healed by the surgeon there, and they'll come and pick her up when they finish their expedition on their way back to wherever it is that they come from. And at that point, she can decide to join them again, or she can just move on, right? If she decides to leave the town before they come back, they'll know that she doesn't want to be part of their team anymore, and they'll understand. And this is where the prologue ends. The main story starts here, and we see that Viv wakes up in a tiny little room, and she's hungry as hell. She manages to hobble down the stairs into the main room of the inn. She meets Bran, who is a Seafae tavern owner. He feeds her, and he tells her where they are. They're in a little village called Merk, and the inn is called The Perch. And so she goes off to explore, to figure out what's happening in this little sleepy village, and she sees basically nothing that draws her interest, except for, a few key elements, right? She meets an orc whose name is Pitts, who just kind of runs around the town trying to move things around. He's kind of like a delivery service, I guess you could call it. And he does some work on the side here and there as necessary for the town. She finds the bookstore called Thistlebur, after the last name of the characters that own it, I guess. She ignores it because she's not a reader, and she finds a bakery, but because she doesn't have her money pouch with her, she can't go to buy anything. And so she comes back to continue to walk around the town, and she ends up encountering Iradia, who is the head gate warden of the town, and she's a type of snake lady. I think they're called Tapenti or Tapenti in this world, and she knows that Viv is trouble because Viv is an adventurer, she's hot-blooded, and this lady doesn't want any issues. So she tells Viv very clearly, hey, if you're gonna be here, you better not have your sword with you, and you better keep it down. Don't be rowdy, right? And so they have a bit of an antagonistic relationship to start off with. She comes back around to the bookshop and enters, and it's a bit of a mess. She meets Fern, who is a sassy, mouthy little ratkin lady. She's really funny because the only other ratkin that we know as a character is the one from Legends of Lattes, and in that version, or that ratkin is a very soft-spoken, very kind of shy, skittish kind of guy. I think his name was Thimble, right? And Fern is the opposite. She's a very loud, very funny, and very dirty-mouthed character, and she's really funny, and I really, really enjoy this character. And we get to meet Pot Roast, whose name is actually Palace, but she doesn't like calling him that, so she calls him Pot Roast. And we learn that he is a bird dog, or a griffet. He has the body of a corgi and the head of an owl, and it's really cute. I really love this animal. It's very adorable. And she guilts Viv into buying a book. And so, with nothing better to do in the sleepy town, Viv starts reading it, and this is kind of what draws Viv into the town, into this world that she's gonna now find herself in, helping out this lady with her bookshop. So she starts reading it, she really loves it, she enjoys it, and a few days later, Hylark, the surgeon, which she almost choked out to death while he was trying to heal her the first time that she was in Merc, shows up to check up on her leg, and because he knows that Viv is impatient, he gives her a way to help her heal her leg faster, which is using this thing called callus oil. And apparently callus oil, C-A-L-L-I-S, will help her heal faster, but it's gonna hurt like hell. I guess it's some sort of like, it's like when you put icy hot on your leg because your legs are sore or whatever. It's kind of like that sort of idea, right? It burns and it tingles, and it really is a nasty sensation, but it helps her heal faster. And so she'll take it, and this helps her get on with her life better, right? Eventually, she manages to make it to the bakery on a different day, and she gets hit on by the owner, who is this cute dwarf lady called Mei Li. And she buys some extra food from the bakery to take down to Fern, since it's been a few days and she still owes her a bit of money, right? So they hang out there at Fern's business for a while, and Fern kind of quickly becomes friendly with Vivian, or with Viv, and they start to develop a meaningful rapport with each other. Fern tells her about the ails of her business, the fact that it's a failing business, that it's going to go under, that she's barely managing to keep it afloat with the sale of sea charts. And then they talk about the book. They have a lot of fun discussing it, and Fern gives her another one. And in this case, she asks her not to pay her yet. They'd rather have a wager. If she likes the book, she'll buy it. If she doesn't like the book, she'll buy it too. But it'll be for a different reason, right? Or actually, I think, let me rephrase that. I think that the way I said the wager was wrong. If she likes it, she buys it. If she can't finish it, she buys it. If she likes it, and if she doesn't like it, she can just return it, right? But basically, it's a way to force Viv to read this book, because Fern thinks that it'll help her become more, interested in reading, right? And on the way out, Viv manages to find Pitts, who's dragging around his cart, and she asks him to help her get some wood and some planks and some tools to replace these planks in front of Fern's store that are rotted and that she keeps breaking as she kind of steps into the shop. She's eventually back at the perch, and this is when we meet Galina. And actually, I wanna keep calling her Gallina because that's how her name is spelled, and in Spanish that means hen, right? So I keep thinking of like a little bird person, even though she's like a gnome, which I guess would be more like a Smurf or something. And she meets Galina, and we know that she's friends with her in the future, but this is their first meeting, right? This is almost like we know who Viv is, and now we need to learn where she got all of her things from. So she gets Galina here when she meets her, and Galina is there because she wants someone to introduce her to Rackham so that she can join his adventuring team. And she ends up being a bit of a little shit. She's really funny. I really enjoy her interactions with Viv because at this point they're not friends yet. They're getting to that point, and so a lot of Galina's vibe and the way that she is as a person is a bit rougher on the edges because she's younger, and also she's not actually friends with Viv yet. And so the way that they interact is a bit different from what we're used to, and I really enjoy this difference. I think that Travis managed to make this work very well. So yeah, the next day Viv comes back to Fern's place and she starts doing some handiwork, and it turns out that she's really bad at it. She can't measure her strength well, and she doesn't have the aptitude to find the best way to cut wood and to shape it into the right shape that she needs for the job. And later Fern sees that Viv did stuff without her knowing about it, and that it was supposed to help her, and so she feeds Viv and Pitts as thanks, kind of rather unhappily actually. She doesn't want to, but she knows that she owes them, so she does. And I thought that was pretty funny, especially because Pitts, for whatever reason, is like afraid of the ratkin, or of just interacting with people. And it's pretty funny that he just like runs away as soon as he can. And Fern again agonizes about the fact that she might lose her family business, that her father made the shop run for 50 years. He left it to her, and she's gonna ruin it. She's gonna flush it down the toilet because she's not good at the job. And well, Viv kind of tries to comfort her, and they try to develop a plan to make it better, right? Eventually, Viv ends up having to go to Highlark again to get her leg looked at, and apparently it's healing very well. So she gets a walking stick, and she gets to switch it out for her crutch. And then she goes into town, inside the city wall, and she manages to get a cobbler to give her a sandal, which will help her move more easily because now she doesn't have to deal with hurting her foot constantly. And as she's in town, she senses trouble. And this is where the start of the serious plot line starts, right? She's back at the bookshop. She helps Fern clean it out. And they come up with an interesting arrangement where Viv will hang out at the bookshop. And this should help bring more people to the business because they'll see that someone is there. And because she is going to stay there for a while, she bought this furniture and she's going to make use of it in the store, right? And this helps make the store feel a little bit more homey, a little bit more alive because it has been feeling kind of depressed and sad and kind of just like not worth the trip, which is probably why Fern was having such a difficult time with it, right? And at this point, Fern and Viv finally start talking to each other as like real friends. They share who they are with each other, where they come from, and stuff like that. And at this point, Fern gives Viv a new book. This one is a bit of a bodice ripper. It's written by Celia Greatstrider, who is a local author who is very successful. And, well, it turns out that Viv ends up really enjoying this book as well. And later, we see that the danger that Viv sensed is actually a dangerous man that's very suspicious. He walks into Fern's shop, and he's just kind of browsing. Something happens. Pot Roast gets hurt by this man kind of randomly. He just like slaps him out of the air. And this is kind of the start of the issues, right? Viv runs this guy down later, and she has a fight with him. Galina helps her at this point, and then they get thrown in jail. And later, this man escapes kind of unknowingly, like very easily without anyone noticing. And so the girls get let out eventually as well. So they go back to their routine, which means that Viv is helping Fern. At this point, she's painting the shop. And Galina starts hanging out with them at this point. She becomes friendly with Viv properly now, and their little trio now becomes a foursome with Galina. And Maylene also starts hanging out with them because Viv and Maylene start dating. And it's a very innocent, very cutesy, wholesome kind of system or kind of relationship that they have. But, you're kind of used to this from the way that Travis wrote the romance in the previous book. So it's a bit different. I think that one is a much more wholesome, or not wholesome, that's the wrong word, a much more complete relationship because they end up, developing into like a proper, like long-term relationship. With Maylene, it's more of a casual kind of date situation. And this is because they both know that Viv will eventually leave, and it's better to not make it that serious because she's just there for a while, right? She's not there to stay, which is different from her situation in Legends and Lattes, right? Then the man that they dealt with, whose name is Balthus, was found dead. The girls search the area. They find nothing except for a satchel, and they grab it, and they hide it from Iridia, and they put it in Fern's house. And it turns out that it's actually a undead. They managed to activate it. And this undead is a very fancy butler skeleton whose name is Satchel. And he starts helping them around the shop. He cleans it constantly. He helps them come up with new ideas. And he is a fun, interesting presence because he's kind of like, I don't know, he's like a helpful butler kind of character. And they learn a little bit about the necromancer at this point. Her name is Vereen, and they can't get Satchel to give them information about her because his, like the way that he was created stops him from doing so. Or at least he's afraid of doing so because he knows that Vereen will eventually know, right? And at this point, Viv and Fern come up with an idea to create this grab bag system where they just wrap a bunch of books into a little bit of a satchel, and then they put a description on what the books contained within are, and they make it a surprise sale. So you buy these books, it's 3 books to a bag. You don't know what books you'll get, but they're going to be very discounted. And so it's a roll of the die. It's a bit of a gotcha situation, and it's pretty good. It actually ends up being successful once they try it at the boardwalk, right? And so they managed to get a lot of customers, but then they realized that now they've given a bunch of books away at this point, and no one really needs any for a while, right? It also happens that while they were doing the preparation for this, they find a suspicious book within the bookshop. It turns out that Balthus was in the bookshop to leave this behind so that he could frame them for it, basically, or so that he wouldn't be chased. And it's Varine's. And, well, they test it out. It turns out that it's a book of gates, I guess, of warp gates to different places. And Viv reaches into it, and she pulls out Blackblood, her awesome blade, and she starts keeping it with her, and she goes and gives the book to Iridia, and she kind of forgets about it for a while. So they continue to live their life here, just kind of making sure that the inside of the shop is fixed up and nice, and trouble starts to brew as Varine visits Viv in her dreams. And Mylene and Viv eventually do talk about the fact that their relationship will soon end, but they want to continue to enjoy it while it lasts. And Fern gets her shipment of new books that she ordered, and she finally has space for. And Galena recruits Viv to do a hunting of spinebacks. And Viv initially declines, but then decides that she does want to do this later. And before she joins up with Galena, she takes Fern with her to go see Celia Greatstrider. And they have a very funny interaction with her where they manage to convince her to come down to the bookshop and do a signing and a conversation with people and just have fun. And she agrees. They set it up for the next Friday after they visit her, and it happens, and it's a success. And there's some surprising characters that show up to talk to her, and it's pretty funny. I really enjoyed this bit. Viv and Galena, go hunting. They hunt the spinebacks, but they see that the ones that they're killing are actually starved. They're not looking like they would look if they had been successfully hunting farmers' food, right? Or farmers' animals, right? And so they realize that it's actually undead. And so they run back to Merc, and they see that the sleepy village outside of the city walls is fine, but the inside of the city has some troubles. They go to Iridia, and they tell her what's going on. They talk about the book. They show Satchel to her, and then they have to run back to Fern's place because Varine is holding Fern and Galena hostage, and Potrose hostage as well. And Viv managed to create a plan with Satchel behind the scenes, which we didn't really get to see, but we got, an idea for. And so Viv has to face off against Varine, and she gives her the book. She opens it to, monologue about it. And as she's about to start, Satchel comes out of the Eldritch book and pulls Varine in. And he pulls her in into one of the regions that she has a portal to. And then he comes out of it, and Viv hugs the book closed as it jerks and tries to open itself up again as Varine tries to escape it. And eventually it stops moving, and there is a dead feeling coming from the book. It no longer feels real. Satchel, thankfully, can continue to exist even though Varine is dead. And this is when the story kind of ends up wrapping up. We get to see that Rackham has come back into town. Viv and Galena decide to go with him. And Viv has to go and say her goodbyes to Fern and Potrose and Iridia and Mylene and everything. And it's a bit bittersweet, but they go on to their next adventure at this point. And then we have a bit of an epilogue that happens after the end of Legends of Lattes. It's been a few years since the end of Legends of Lattes, and Viv gets a letter. And it turns out that Fern is coming into town. And it seems like they might set up a bookshop together there in Thune, next to the Legends of Lattes coffee shop. So that's a very, quick rundown of the book. It was really, really enjoyable. I loved it. My favorite part is really the idea that Viv gets her interest in owning a shop or anything due to her interest in books, thanks to Fern's attempts to get her to read, right? And I have always loved bookshops and bookstores. There's a local bookstore or local used bookstore that I used to go to when I was a kid, and I still go there every once in a while when I go visit my parents. And when I was a kid, I always wanted to work there. I thought it would be cool to work there for a summer, but I could never manage to do it because the bookstore wasn't really local to me. It used to be local, and then me and my family moved somewhere else, and we ended up being kind of like too far away to make it work, especially as a teenager. Like, it would just cost me like more than an hour's wage worth of gas to get there and then another one to come back home, and so it wouldn't really be worth it. And so I never got to work there, but I always thought that the idea of working at a bookshop was interesting and enjoyable and really wholesome. And so getting to experience that through this story was great. It also helped me deal with some of the pain of losing my dog, right, through the hijinks of Pot Roast the Griffith. And I just think it's really, really enjoyable. It's very relaxing, even though there are stakes, right? And honestly, I think that the fact that Fern has to deal with the fact that she might lose her shop and that it'll be like 60 years worth of work down the drain if she loses it, I feel is a lot more serious than like, oh, we gotta kill the dragon or the world ends, because that's not real, right? The loss of a family owned business, and the loss of your generational wealth, and the loss of the last thing you have of your dad are real things, and they're actually much more serious than anything that we can see in a normal fantasy story. And so I don't necessarily consider this a cozy fantasy, right? This is a slice of life fantasy that is very relaxing, but it deals with very real, honest issues, right? And so I really appreciate it. I think it's great. And yeah, that's it for the plot line. In terms of characters, we have Viv and Galena. We get introduced to Fern and Pitts and Pot Roast and Mei Lee and Hylark and Iridia and Celia and Burke and Bran. And we meet Satchel and Vareen and Balthus and Rackham, who is the leader of the Rackham Ravens. And in terms of world building, we don't really get much, except we learned that necromancers are a thing that exist in this world, which is pretty cool, but not super meaningful. We also learn about Griffiths and the way that this world has a very bustling and meaningful book industry, which is not what you would assume from a medieval fantasy setting, right? Usually books in medieval kind of reality would be very difficult to come by, very expensive, but these end up being about $20 a piece, which is pretty accessible. It's what most books cost nowadays, and especially if they're used, they cost even less, right? So, you know, there is like a modern industry that is anachronous, but it is what it is, right? It doesn't fit into the world, but it does anyways, because it is what it is. And in terms of artwork and fan service, there's no artwork, there's no fan service. You know, there is an implied level of sensuality or sexuality that Viv has because she notices Maylene is a beautiful person and stuff like that, but it's very low stakes. It's very, you know, you could like not be paying attention and miss it. And there's a lot of talk about romantasy type books, right? They call them moist books in the story. And so, you know, there is a certain element of like, you know, the fact that there is sexuality in this, but it's very minimal. It's you know, very you know, blasé or kind of laissez-faire. It's very simple. It just kind of goes, and it doesn't do anything meaningful. And it was good. In terms of artwork, I mean, we just have the cover, and I think the cover's awesome. I would like to see more artwork. I think that these would be great if they were turned into light novels, so they would have illustrations every once in a while to fit this. Maybe that's what you know, a proper Epic edition or collector's edition would have, because what I've seen from the current collected editions or collector's editions is that they just have a nice hardcover and an interesting design, but that doesn't mean much. That doesn't add value in my case. I think that adding illustrations or maybe making an illustrated version of Legends of Lattes really is where it's at. That would be much more meaningful, much better. And I think that they should have the same guy or the same woman or whoever it is that does the illustrations here do those if they do an illustrated version, right? Mostly just because I really like the Ratkins and I would like to see more artwork of them. But yeah, in terms of rating, 5 out of 5, super relaxing. I loved it. I think it was super, super great. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Bookshops and Bonedust. Let me know what you thought down below. Thank you so much for watching, and see you guys later.